Hugo Rojas of Scott D. Pollock and Associates, an immigration law firm in Chicago, joins us now to talk about this story that is ever evolving, Hugo, and never in a good way. Never, it seems, in a good way. There's always some new rule. Now it's the fact that the Trump administration wants to undo, as we just heard in the AP News. They want to undo the Flores rule. They want the permission to be able to keep families and especially children in detention indefinitely. Indefinitely. I mean, do you just shake your head every morning when you get up? How do you not?
Well, it emphasizes. First of all, thank you for having me. Yeah, I mean, it emphasizes a point that what we do to make things better is more important than ever. It's just not a time to give up hope and not basically curl up in a ball in a fetal position. So when things like this happen, it's even more important to do what's best for your clients and make sure that they're prepared when they have to face a judge or ICE or whoever it is.
Now, we just heard in the news at the top of the hour how Gavin Newsom, the governor in California, was like, we're not going to do this here. It's not going to hold. California obviously has a southern border, and perhaps he has some influence there. Is there anything that J.B. Pritzker could be doing? I mean, obviously, we don't get so many people coming over from Canada into Illinois as the problem that's being focused on the southern border. But is there anything that could be done legislatively here, either at the city level or the state level, to help ease this?
Well, I'm not. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what if there would be specific standing that Pritzker might be able to have.
Because it's the federal and state, there is that separation of powers.
And I think that California's position might be that they have standing because their border, they have an international border and it affects them directly. Where other states might have standing would be if their family members of people who are detained and it would affect residents of those particular states. In terms of what all could be done locally, I think Chicago's pretty good about keeping federal law enforcement and local law enforcement separate. In terms of this whole notion that's been bandied about having sanctuary cities somehow in defiance of federal law. It's kind of a misnomer because the issue of the sanctuary city is about making sure if you're a resident of a community that you feel confident to contact the authorities when there's a crime. The minute that trust goes away because you don't feel like local authorities are going to have your back if you call them for
or even
crime.
Worse, you call the police to report a crime and you fear the police are going to pick up the phone and call ICE.
Correct. It's as a law enforcement strategy, it just doesn't work. And so I think to the extent that those kinds of policies remain, that's certainly the direction that we should be moving in.
Well, with these last round of raids that Trump touted, Sunday, big raids all across the country, thousands going to be rounded up. And Lori Lightfoot said our police aren't going to help. They're not going to be part of it. They're not going to barricade streets. They're not going to give ICE access to the police database. And the raids, at least in Chicago, not much materialized. But I've talked to a number of community activists and businesses in Hispanic areas like Pilsen. Businesses showed fewer receipts. People weren't going to the grocery store. They weren't going to the coffee shop. They were afraid to leave their homes. Some people were afraid to go to their jobs.
Yeah. And we received dozens of calls at our firm from clients who were anxious about these raids. Thankfully, they didn't happen. But there were calls from people who wouldn't have been affected by the raids in any event because they had a way to adjust or a way to have some kind of relief under the immigration system. People don't make those kinds of distinctions when they hear in the news media that someone's going to come after immigrants and you're an immigrant. And so it promotes this kind of fear. And loathing about going outside.
And I think ICE, to their detriment, I can't believe that everybody who works for them is a bad person, but to their detriment, they have this sort of bully image. For instance, the case I'm sure you were familiar with several weeks ago, where three children who were U.S. citizens were detained and by Customs and Border Patrol at O'Hare, and the message to the parents was, "You have to come get them. We're not you. You have to come get them." Apparently, knowing full well that both of the parents were undocumented. The kids were legal U.S.
Yep.
citizens, but legal U.S. citizens who were grabbed, and they were traveling with a relative who had a travel visa, a tourist visa. And the Border Patrol people at O'Hare said, no, no, that visa's no good. They turned around, they put that woman back on a plane, back to Mexico, and they held the kids. They held the kids for I think it ended up being 14 or 16 hours.
Yeah.
And it was just a nightmare. And it just doesn't seem like that's the United States of America.
Right. The problem with that particular scenario, too, is I put myself, I loathe to do this, but if I'm in this position of the ICE officer and all of a sudden I'm faced with, I have two minors who have a right to be here because they're U.S. citizens, who do I release them to?
But the family sent their lawyer with a notarized form that gave her legal right to pick up the kids, and Customs and Border Patrol still refused to let them go.
That would have sufficed. Yeah, I mean, you at some point,
it's the lawlessness.
At some point,
the
right.
disrespect for the rule of law that is, it makes ICE seem like boogeymen.
Right. Yeah. At some point, by and large, what seems to have happened over the last couple of years is. The favorable discretion that used to be exercised at a local level and an individual level by officers, either at ICE or at CBP, seems to have gone away. I mean, there's a lot less discretion. There's a lot less favorable discretion being exercised at all levels.
A lot less sense being used, it seems to me, yes. In this atmosphere in which we find ourselves.
Correct.
There was recently the case of a woman from Mount Prospect, a pastor's wife, 66 years old. More than 30 years after she left the Philippines for life here, she was put aboard a plane and sent back. Jan Schakowsky tried to stop it. Senator Dick Durbin tried to stop it. But Immigration and Customs Enforcement sent Julita Bartolome back to the Philippines, 66-year-old pastor's wife, been here more than 30 years. You know, when Donald Trump first announced that he was going to crack down on immigration, he said that he was going to go after the bad hombres, the criminals, the people who come to this country and pillage. She does not sound like a bad hombre to me, Hugo.
Certainly doesn't. And nor do the, was it 400 people who were arrested in Mississippi? I mean, workers at a food processor. Mm-hmm. Right. I mentioned that to illustrate that the attack is widespread. It's there's two terms that sort of developed over this period. One is this notion that USCIS and ICE and Department of Homeland Security administrative agencies are creating this thing called the invisible wall. So there's a physical wall that President Trump likes to talk about building, which would presumably stop bad hombres from coming in. But they don't need to build the invisible wall to make it more uncomfortable or more difficult for immigrants to come here. What's being created is a series of administrative moves and restrictions that are completely legal, but have the effect of reducing legal immigration and legal visitors into the U.S. And so that's part and parcel with this whole climate of trying to restrict people from coming here, making it more difficult to stay here. The other term is what we are calling the deportation machine. That seems like it goes back to what I was saying before. At a local, even individual level, law enforcement, immigration law enforcement officers are exercising less and less favorable discretion when it comes to situations like the ones you just mentioned. This woman probably has no criminal background.
It says here that she's been trying to become a citizen for 20 years,
Right, right,
which is probably her efforts that put her in the legal system, is probably how she popped up.
right, right.
So it's a real catch-22. Oh, you go through this system to become a citizen, but oh, once you do, we'll see that you're not a citizen.
Absolutely. They don't. So I think what it highlights is there's a need really to make sure that if you're going to be in the process that you're well defended. We had a case similar to this. Woman came in 1990. Her husband was touring the U.S. in a rock band. He was a legal permanent resident. Her husband got in a car accident, became a paraplegic from the neck down. Came to the U.S. The woman came to the U.S. to care for her husband on a 3-month tourist visa in 1990. Overstayed because
Yeah,
couldn't leave.
he didn't get better.
Right. And so she overstayed. And 6 months later, the government tried to deport her because she overstayed her visa. The government at that point, seeing that her husband was paraplegic and needed care, granted her humanitarian relief, and she's able to stay for a long time with permission. 2004, her husband applies for citizenship. This would have allowed her.
She did, or her husband?
Her husband. Her husband was a legal permanent resident. In 2004, he applied for citizenship. This would have allowed him to apply for her to become a legal permanent resident, notwithstanding the illegal unauthorized stay in the U.S. He couldn't show up to his fingerprint appointment because he's paraplegic. USCIS threw away the application, and as a result, it stopped. 3 years later, husband dies. 2007, she's a widow now of an LPR, which doesn't a legal permanent resident, which doesn't give you any sort of benefit. In 2008, ICE arrests her to deport her. Congressman Lipinski intervenes, and she's released, and she's able to stay here on a yearly basis by renewing some permission to be here. She marries a U.S. citizen years later. She applies to become a legal permanent resident finally this year. As she's going through the process, she puts herself in the process. She wants to do the right thing. The authorities find out that, wait, you have a removal order from 1990. We're going to deport you.
The first removal
Yes.
order, but from when her husband was first injured and she overstayed trying to take care of it.
Exactly. Tried to remove her. She'd been here for 30 years. Almost 30 years, right? No crimes. Not a bad hombre or bad woman, I guess, in this case, right? And we intervened. She was arrested. She was put in jail. They were going to deport her. And there was, at any point in time during that process, there could have been some favorable discretion. None of that happened.
Like with this woman,
Right.
somebody could have said, you know what? This isn't what those laws were intended for.
Right.
This isn't the kind of person that we need to purge.
Absolutely.
So what happened?
And what ended up happening, we were successful in actually having the judge terminate the previous removal order, and now she's received her green card and she's normalized her situation. But it took a long time. It took a lot of lawyer time, and it took a lot of stress on her, and it took a lot of resources that, as the public, didn't need to be spent. So, but that's the reality we're in now.
At least that had a good outcome.
Yes.
This poor woman, Julita Bartolome, has been put on a plane back to Manila in the Philippines, even though she'd been here for more than 30 years. She'd spent 20 years in the process trying to get a citizenship. Jan Schakowsky, Dick Durbin intervened, and that's what you were talking about. You said for this woman a few years ago, Dan Lipinski was able to say, "Hey guys, I'm her congressman.
Right.
This is not a woman that we definitely need to put on a plane to send back." But, Jan Schakowsky was also at O'Hare that day for those three girls, U.S. citizens who were being held. And Customs and Border Patrol refused to let her see the children, refused to let her talk to anybody.
Yeah.
It was Mayor Lori Lightfoot called up and talked to them. I don't know what, if anything, was said in that conversation, but finally the mom was allowed to come and pick up the girls, and the mom was not taken into custody. I think quite possibly because by then there were at least two radio stations and a
Right.
television station who
Sure.
were also there
Right. Absolutely.
reporting on the story.
Right.
Grab your headphones. We have a lot of people who want to join our conversation today. Hi, Paul. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. I have a question that I thought I knew the answer to, but have never asked a lawyer about this. It seems to me these detention centers are in just blatant violation of the Fifth Amendment. When I'm thinking of no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process. Now, my thought is that this is civil law. If it were not, then every one of these people in detention is entitled to an arraignment within a short period of time and an attorney, which they're not. So it's this detaining them indefinitely. I can see a number of days being part of due process, but you can't just say indefinitely and say that's part of due process. Isn't this a violation of the Constitution, the Fifth Amendment? And what's going on? This is exactly what the Constitution is written to prevent.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, the lawsuit that was filed today, or was announced today, I'm not sure it was filed today, about this, that's the basis for the lawsuit. It's a deprivation of a due process for people in detention. Now, the other thing that's crazy about this whole rule is that it's premised on a false notion. The notion being that we need to keep these people in detention because if we release them into the interior, they're not going to show up to their court dates.
And that's not true. Studies show that people do show up.
Their own statistics, the Department of Justice statistics show that 89% of asylum cases, asylees, show up to their court cases. And if they're represented, that number goes up to 98%. So really, this is not about compliance with court orders.
This is
what it really is about is up to your own interpretation. But it's whatever it is not about compliance with the court order.
Well, what it certainly seems to be is a war on brown people. I mean that. Donald Trump has been accused of being white supremacist. He's been accused of being a racist. He always denies those claims, but he said early in his administration, why don't we get people who want to immigrate from Finland? Those tall white people, those blonde people, why don't we get them? Not those brown people. And we've got a number of people who want to weigh in on the conversation here. If you want to grab your headphones real quick. Hi, Melvin. Thanks for calling today.
Yeah, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great. But you know what I'm thinking?
What?
I'm thinking that as long as Mitch McConnell and the Senate majority, the Republicans on vacation, Trump is allowed to do what he wants to do. He won't allow to get away with stuff. All this mess that's going across the border, he's doing it because McConnell won't say anything. McConnell's not there to say anything. And
even when McConnell was there, he didn't say anything. Even when McConnell was there, he hasn't done anything to try to rein in Donald Trump.
McConnell was giving Trump everything he wants.
Exactly.
And if Trump wouldn't be where he is unless McConnell give him everything he wants.
I couldn't agree with you more.
I tell you, these kids, these down at the border, the way they're being treated, everybody should call Jeffrey Levin the father's rights people.
Well, I think he's a divorce attorney, but you got to start somewhere, Melvin. Thanks.
That's right. Jeffrey Levin had no handle father's rights because it's too many kids being trapped down at the border and has no business. And we're going to see what McConnell going to say then.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Appreciate the call. Hi, Chris. How are you?
Alrighty, this is not going to make me very popular.
All right, we're ready for you.
Okay, and by the way, I am not a Republican or I'm not a Trump supporter. I am a moderate Democrat. I'm moderate Democrat, one of the cursed, hated people out there. But I'm getting the feeling from both of you that if somebody is, overstayed their visa, is basically in the country illegally meaning that they do not have a right to be here because they don't have a valid visa or they don't have a valid, green card or what have you, that as long as they stay here long enough, they're home free. That they should not be removed. And
Well, don't you think it should be decided on a case-by-case basis?
I think, if people come into the United States and overstay their visa, that they definitely should not be, they don't have a right to be in this country. People don't have an inherent right to enter the United States. And that if they overstay their visa, they're in the United States illegally, that, they should not stay in the United States. Otherwise, why bother having an immigration laws? Why not just simply say, you can come into the United States, and if we don't catch you after whatever, some arbitrary period of time, and you say 20 years, well, why not 20 months? Why not 20 days? Why not 20 weeks? At what point do you say, no, I'm sorry, but you're not in this country legally. You need to go home, go back to where you came from.
Go ahead, Hugo.
And most of the time, that's right. Actually, if you overstay your visa, that's a starting point. But the law doesn't work that way. I mean, the law doesn't work that way with anything. If you have a way to seek relief, if you have a way to rebut the position that you don't belong here, that's what the courts are for. And so, for instance, if you come in legally and you overstay a visa, this is just one particular instance, but there's multiple ways of answering a question. It's a case by case basis, of course. If you come in legally, overstay your visa several years, and then while you're here, you marry a U.S. citizen. The law, the way it's written, favors family unification, and it favors family. There's a policy that favors U.S. citizens having their family stay in the U.S. So that's one way where, is that lawless? That you don't have a right to be here? You've overstayed? Well, no, that's actually written. That's part of the law. That law can't be completely black and white. There's got to be a way for people to be able to argue that they shouldn't be removed. And that's not just for immigration law. That goes for most of our laws aren't exactly black and white. There's always an argument. There's always a way for you to be able to establish rights and for you to be able to assert due process.
And the case that I was talking about, the pastor's wife, Julita Bartolome, she was in the system. And I think the case that you were talking about, your client was in the system. These were people who were filing the paperwork, working through the process, trying to follow the law to become citizens. And that's when their names popped up,
right,
and they were able to be deported,
right,
which kind of, if we really want people to become citizens legally, we can't use that process as a backhanded way to deport people.
Right. And, I think just to answer Chris's, initial concern, most of the time, a lot of times, I would say even most of the time, if you overstay a visa, Chris is right. A lot of times when someone overstays their visa and they come to see an immigration lawyer about fixing their problem, there's not a lot we can do. But sometimes there is. And that's fine too. That's what the law is there for you to be able to see if there's a way to seek relief.
And the Trump administration has all this focus on the southern border and people crossing the border. My understanding, and Hugo, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of the undocumented people in this country are here because they come over on a student visa or a tourist visa or some other kind of short-term permission and then simply stay.
That's correct. The vast majority of our
wall isn't going to keep them out.
No, and perfect compliance with immigration law. This sounds it's going to hurt our economy, because if you want perfect compliance with immigration law, well, then you close the airports, you close the borders, and no one comes in unless you're absolutely sure that person has a zero risk, or as close to approaching zero as possible, that they're going to overstay. We can't. That would hurt the tourism industry. I mean, let's not get.
And how many American colleges, particularly the private universities, really rely on foreign students? Because what I've been reading in the Wall Street Journal, the advantage that these universities find in foreign students is that foreign students usually pay full freight.
Right.
They're not asking for grants. They're not asking for aid. They're like, hey,
we'll
write you a check.
Right, and they don't qualify for it either. They have to pay.
Well, but it's a full freight student.
Right. It's required. It's if you're going to be if you're a foreign student in the U.S., you have to pay full freight. But the other sort of pragmatic argument about that is it's one of the only parts of our economy that actually has a trade surplus. Americans don't go study abroad to get degrees. People come here to get degrees. So that's one part of our economy where we're way ahead in the world, and that's something to be protected. So I mean, but so much of this talk about immigration isn't about pragmatism. It's about the anxieties of a changing country, which we've always had. That's always been the case in America. So I like to think that there's nothing new under the sun, and today's immigrants are going to be the restrictionists of tomorrow, and that's just kind of how it works.
So when the country is a majority Hispanic, we're going to watch all those people from Finland who are coming here on their tourist visas. Man, those Finnish people, they better not overstay.
Yeah, they're swimming across from Greenland.
Hi, Roberta. How are you?
I'm fine, Joan. How are you?
I'm good. What did you want to talk about today?
Well, we keep talking about all the brown people, but what about like all the people from Poland and the Eastern Bloc that come here that are illegal, and there are a lot of them.
We do have a very large Polish population here in Chicago.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think I kind of alluded to it. I didn't specifically describe who was calling our office, but we have all people from every part of the world as clients of ours. But I think immigrants in general, regardless of where they're from, are anxious. There's a general anxiety among folks who are trying to normalize their situation, or in the process of becoming a resident, or even in the process of becoming a citizen. There's this general anxiety no matter where you're from, and that includes Polish immigrants.
But Roberta, if I understand your point, are you wondering why ICE doesn't seem to be targeting those?
Exactly.
As the way ICE seems to be targeting people of color.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So do you find that to be the case? I mean, obviously everyone's worried now. Obviously there's a lot of stress and pressure no matter where you're from. But, I mean, he makes a good point. I mean, you don't think of the Polish neighborhoods as being subject to massive ICE raids.
Sure. There's been stories of profiling going on in the interior of the country, where people are being asked to prove that they're citizens because they're overheard speaking Spanish at a convenience store.
Yeah, and we've reported on some of those cases. There was one, I think, right here in the Midwest, where two women were filling up their car with gas, and because they were speaking Spanish, they were accused of not being U.S. citizens.
Right. Yeah, that certainly is an issue. But I guess that is true. But I guess I just wanted to emphasize that the feeling of dread and anxiety is felt pretty uniformly across the board.
Nobody gets a pass in this. Yeah. Hi, Mike. How are you today?
Good. I wanted to ask you, is it all about money? I think maybe we should restrict foreign students from coming over here and taking spots from Americans or legal residents, because you can't say they pay full freight, because then it comes down to money. So do we stop affirmative action because we can do it some other way and get more money? Do we restrict aid to poor Latino and black neighborhoods and just in Lincoln Park because we can get a better return on investment? If you're going to go by money, you got to go by money all the time.
Well, I was just pointing out from what I've been reading is that one of the reasons that it came out a few years ago, because there was this big controversy over who was getting into Ivy League schools. And you're right, Mike, you're absolutely right. Certain Ivy League schools were setting aside a number of places for foreign students, particularly Chinese students. And part of the reason they did that was for budgetary reasons, was they knew they were going to get a certain amount of income from those students. And it was really controversial. And a lot of people were saying similar things to what Mike is saying, and I can understand where the colleges are coming from, because it just seems like a lot of, maybe not the Ivy League, they seem to have plenty of cash, but there are a lot of schools, now that state funds seem to be drying up and federal funds are a little bit trickier to come by. How do you continue to have a good college? How do you continue to hire professors and instructors? It takes money, and you got to try to figure out how you can make a go of it. And it's got to be pretty tempting to those people when they look at a certain, if you set aside 30% of your freshman class to people who for sure are going to pay full freight. That's money you can count on in your budget. It's a tricky question, and it's a complicated question, and I don't have any easy answers. Hi, Doug. How are you today?
Good. How are you, Joe?
Good.
A couple callers back, they always bring out the word brown, black and brown people, and you just got to understand. And then your guest would say something like, "Yeah, you're not going after the Polish people on the same percentage."
Actually, I said that.
Okay. But listen, that's not what the problem is. Take a look at when you see the news, and it's liberal news when you see it, and they're on top of trains that are coming across a bridge in thousands. And you know what? When you what about the Polish people? Come on, the percentage is so much different. They're not even apples to apples. And people that call in and say, "Hey, what about these people?" Take a look at the border, for God's sakes. That's where the problem is. We have a problem on the southern border. That is the issue. And when people call in, or people write letters, or people say the black and brown people, they're being unfairly targeted, they're being rationally, proportionally targeted, which is 100% apropos.
Okay, Hugo, what do you think about that?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt that there is a crisis at the southern border. There are people there. There was a time over the last year at least, there's been an increase of people coming. I think the issue isn't the issue really is how we treat them once they get here, and the issue is how we manage that flow. The system is at a breaking point. That is true, but there's no way our government has to lose in court to be able to be forced to provide soap and toothpaste to people who were under our care. So I don't have the answer, but I think the outrage that's a lot of the frustration people are feeling about what's going on in the border is a lot has to do with how our government is treating people who are detained.
One of the things that seems to me to be a parallel here, I was talking to someone about prison reform, and they said, well, if you look back, most of the younger people in the prisons never finished high school. So let's go to the beginning of what appears to be this pipeline for some young people, a pipeline that takes them right to prison. And let's look at how we can get those people to stay in school and how we can get those people to get degrees and sort of start on a different path. And it seems to me that there's a parallel. I mean, we want the Central American countries to clean up their messes, but we don't want to offer any help. And it's the reason that people are leaving. Nobody illegally leaves their country because they've got a great life. You know, if you're sitting back and you're making plenty of money and you're well educated and you've got a satisfying career, you are not going to pack up your bags and cross the border into any other country to try to become a citizen of that country. So we've kind of been neglecting, you know, this problem of why is it that all these people are leaving. There was even talk of making Guatemala this sort of like clearinghouse
Yes,
for
like a
anybody
third
who
country
wanted
processing,
asylum.
yes.
And right now, Guatemala is not really equipped to pull that off. But you can't just say, well, we're not going to give you any help, any support. Go clean up your mess. And oh, by the way, don't let people leave because it's a mess. It seems to me that's where we are.
Right. Yeah, there's the push factor for migration is something that we don't talk enough about when it comes to immigration. The other aspect of it too is that when we changed the law in 1965, which is the regime we're living under right now, that treated all countries equally in terms of immigration into the U.S. When we did that, we actually created a situation where Latin American immigrants and Mexican immigrants in particular would come seasonally. They would come, work, and then go back. Mm-hmm. As soon as we set up a situation where we limited the amount of Mexicans who could come into work, then the price of going back became much higher. And so people came and stayed. And that's a lot of studies suggest that that's what's created the unlawful immigration system that we have now.
Interesting. I never really thought about it like that. That makes a lot of sense. Hi, Roosevelt. How are you today?
Hi. How you doing, Joan? Thank you for taking my call.
You're welcome.
I can't lose track of how we got to this point as far as the people that are coming from Central America, and say we have to stipulate that Reagan interfered in the mid-'80s, particularly Iran-Contra, the three countries that were affected because Reagan interfered. He supported dictatorships to oppress the people and take from those people. That's why they're coming. We created this problem. We have to take responsibility of interfering in those countries. We always support and put in place dictatorships that oppress people. We don't care because us is what benefits the United States. We have to stipulate that. We have to take responsibility. Like the Republicans say, we have to take responsibility for our actions. That's all I got to say.
Thank you, Roosevelt. I appreciate that. Hi, Ann. How are you today? Hello? Ann? Okay. Alrighty. We lost Ann already. Sorry about that, Ann. But you know, this problem. It's like an octopus. You know, it's not like this A led to B, led to C, led to D, and here if we just fix A, then all the rest of the chain will straighten up. It's really a thorny issue.
Yes, absolutely. And I think for me, at the end of the day, it comes to trusting in the future. And I believe that our future's always been about immigration. Our future since day one has been about immigration, about people coming to this country and remaking themselves and making this country greater than the time it was before. So I don't think it's any different now. Every time you go through this iteration of new people coming in, there's going to be anxiety. So
it's something we've been through before. We've been through with the Italians. We've been through with the Irish. Yeah. We've sometimes reluctantly welcomed new people to our shores, but I think that in the end, they've all made our country stronger. This time around, I think, though, there is a little bit of an element of racism involved more so. I mean, the Italian people, for the most part, the Irish people, they looked like.
But think about this: we had laws excluding Chinese people. That was part of our black and white law. That was in the statute. We had laws that outlawed. We interned Japanese Americans, U.S. citizens, not even immigrants. So again, we're not at that point right now, but it doesn't mean we're never going to be at that point again. But we've been through some pretty dark times before. And there's no reason to think that we are not going to emerge from this stronger than just like we did last time.
Wow. That's great, Hugo. What a way to wrap up this conversation on such a hopeful note. I appreciate that. Hugo Rojas works with Scott Pollock and Associates at an immigration law firm. And if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do it, Hugo?
Well, you can call us at the law firm at 312-444-1940, or that's actually the best way.
Okay. And we have the information posted on our website. That's WCPT820.com/Joan. Just keep scrolling, and we always add our new guests at the end of each day or sometimes during the day. Tony can be very efficient that way. So if you're interested in finding out more or you want to talk to Hugo about a situation you have, that's where you can reach out and find him. Thank you so much, Hugo. Really appreciate you coming in and talking about this. The never-ending topic of immigration. It just keeps rolling right along week after week.
Thank you.